The first time my daughter-in-law told me I wasn't welcome in my own house, she didn't raise her voice. She smiled. It was early morning, the kind where the light slips in soft and pale through the curtains, and the kettle was already screaming on the stove because I'd forgotten it was there. I remember thinking how strange it was that she was standing in my kitchen, barefoot, wearing my robe, the blue one with the loose thread near the sleeve, holding a mug I didn't recognize. She leaned against the counter like she'd done it 1,000 times and said, almost gently, "I think it would be best if you gave us some space." Space. That word echoed louder than the kettle ever could. I stood there holding my keys, my purse still on my shoulder, the smell of stale coffee and lemon cleaner hanging in the air. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her, or maybe she was confused. Maybe she thought I was leaving for work. But then she reached past me, and turned the lock on the front door. That soft click changed everything. Before all of this, my life was quiet. Not empty, just settled. I had lived in that house for 27 years. I knew every creak in the floorboards, every stubborn drawer that needed a gentle tug instead of force. The front window faced east, and every morning, without fail, the sun would spill across the living room rug in the shape of a long, warm rectangle. I used to sit there with my coffee before work, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic waking up. It was my house. I paid for it. Every brick, every repair, every winter bill that made me sigh before I wrote the check. My husband and I bought it when our son Daniel was just 4 years old, back when he still slept with one sock on and believed the moon followed our car home. After my husband passed, a sudden heart attack on an ordinary Tuesday, the house became quieter, but it never stopped feeling full of memories, full of purpose. Daniel grew up, moved out, found his way in the world, and when he met Lena, I was happy for him, truly. She was polite at first, careful. She brought flowers the first time she came over, grocery store lilies wrapped in thin plastic, and called me Mrs. Harris until I insisted she use my first name. She had a soft voice, but there was something sharp behind it, like a blade hidden in velvet. I ignored that feeling. Mothers are told to ignore those feelings. When they married, they moved into a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. I remember helping them unpack, handing Daniel a box of plates, and watching Lena rearrange my kitchen drawers in her mind with her eyes. She had opinions, strong ones, but she smiled when she spoke, and Daniel looked at her like she hung the sun. For a while, everything was fine. Then life did what it always does. It shifted. Daniel lost his job when the company downsized. Lena was pregnant, tired, emotional. Dills piled up. Late-night calls started coming, Daniel's voice low and strained, apologizing before he even asked. Dan, sorry. We just need a little time." I didn't hesitate. That's what mothers do. I told them they could stay with me until they got back on their feet. I cleared out the guest room, washed the sheets, bought new towels. I even moved some of my things to make space for Lena, told myself it was temporary. Temporary has a way of stretching. At first, it felt almost nice, the sound of another person moving around the house, the smell of dinner cooking that wasn't mine, Lena nesting, Daniel fixing small things around the house like he used to when he was a teenager and wanted pocket money. But little things began to change. Lena rearranged the pantry without asking, labeled things, threw out spices I'd had for years because they were expired. She replaced my curtains with lighter ones because they let in better energy. I laughed it off, told myself she was just trying to help. Then she started correcting me. Not directly, not rudely, just little comments. We usually don't eat that much salt. Daniel likes his shirts folded this way. It's better if we keep the door locked at all times. The locks I noticed first. One afternoon, I came home and my key didn't work. I stood there longer than I'd like to admit, jiggling it, trying again, my fingers stiff with confusion. Lena opened the door a moment later, smiling like it was nothing. "Oh, we changed the locks. Security reasons. I meant to tell you." I remember nodding, smiling back, swallowing that strange tight feeling in my chest. Daniel avoided my eyes. That night, lying in my bed, listening to the unfamiliar rhythm of footsteps above me, I told myself I was imagining things, that families adjust, that this was what support looked like. But something in my home no longer felt like mine, and I hadn't even realized how far it had gone until the morning Lena locked the door and told me I wasn't welcome. After that morning in the kitchen, I went to work like nothing had happened. That might sound strange, but when something doesn't make sense yet, you move the way you always have. You follow routine because it gives you something solid to hold on to. I drove to the office with my hands tight on the steering wheel, the radio murmuring voices I didn't hear. Every red light felt longer than usual. Every thought circled back to that soft click of the lock. At my desk, the smell of old paper and printer ink wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. I answered emails, smiled at coworkers, poured myself bad coffee from the break room pot. On the outside, I was the same woman I'd always been. Inside, something had shifted. When I came home that evening, Daniel's car was in the driveway. That gave me a small sense of relief. Whatever this was, surely he would clear it up. He was my son. He wouldn't let me be pushed aside in my own home. The house smelled different when I walked in, something sweet and heavy, cinnamon and butter. Lena was baking. Music played softly from a speaker on the counter, something modern I didn't recognize. She glanced up, smiled again, and went back to stirring without saying a word. Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. I set my purse down slowly. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice calm, "can we talk?" He looked up, then at Lena, then back at me. "About what, Mom?" "About everything," I wanted to say. "About the locks, about the way your wife speaks to me like I'm a guest, about how my own house feels like it's slipping through my fingers." Instead, I said, "The locks. I didn't know you were changing them." Lena answered before he could. "It was my idea. You understand, right? With the baby coming, we need stability." Stability. Daniel nodded, eyes still not quite meeting mine. "We should have told you. That's on us." I waited for more, for an apology, for reassurance, for him to say, "This is still your home." It didn't come. That night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe around me. The refrigerator hummed, pipes clicked. Above me, laughter drifted through the ceiling. Lena's laugh, light and confident, followed by Daniel's. I pressed my palm against the mattress and tried to remember when my house had last felt like a place I could relax. The next few weeks blurred together in a quiet, uncomfortable way. Lena started setting house rules. She taped a list to the fridge. No shoes indoors, no guests without notice, quiet hours after 9 p.m. My name wasn't on that list, but I felt it in every line. She moved my things, my mail, my framed photos. One day I came home to find the picture of my late husband, the one of him holding Daniel on his shoulders, gone from the living room. I found it later in a drawer. "I needed the wall space," Lena said when I asked. "We're making this place more family-oriented." I swallowed the irony. Daniel grew quieter, avoidant. He spent more time in their room, door closed. When I tried to talk to him alone, Lena always seemed to appear, in the hallway, in the kitchen, hovering close enough to hear every word. I told myself not to compete, not to become that kind of mother. But then came the paperwork. One afternoon, Lena left an envelope on the kitchen counter, thick, official-looking, my name typed neatly on the front. I didn't open it at first. I made tea, sat down, let the bag steep too long until it tasted bitter. Inside were copies of documents I didn't recognize, utility transfers, insurance changes, and something else that made my heart skip. A form from a local legal office, a residency agreement. I read it twice, my hands trembling just enough to blur the words. It listed Lena and Daniel as primary occupants. It referred to me as remaining resident. Remaining. I heard Lena's footsteps behind me before she spoke. "Oh, good, you found that." I turned slowly. "What is this?" She tilted her head like she was explaining something simple to a child. "Just paperwork. We're establishing residency. It's better for the baby. Doctors, schools, all of that." "And my name?" I asked. "You're still here," she said lightly. "Nothing's changing." But everything already had. That night, I finally confronted Daniel in his room. The door was closed, the air warm and thick. "Daniel," I said on the edge of the bed, "I don't feel welcome in my own house." He rubbed his face, tired. "You're overthinking it." "I'm not," I said quietly. "I'm asking you to see what's happening." He sighed. "Lena's just trying to make things stable. You know how she gets." That's when I realized something painful. He wasn't blind. He was choosing not to look. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. I had gone out to visit a friend, stayed longer than planned. When I returned, the driveway was full. Lena's sister, her mother, people I hadn't been told were coming. Laughter spilled out of the house. I tried my key. It didn't work. I knocked once, twice. Lena opened the door, blocking the entrance with her body. "Oh," she said, "we weren't expecting you back so soon." I stood there, the late afternoon sun hot on my back, and something inside me finally cracked. "This is my house," I said. She smiled, that same calm smile. "We'll talk about that." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, counting the small cracks in the plaster I'd never bothered to fix. The house felt heavier somehow, like the walls themselves were listening. Every sound made my chest tighten. A door closing, water running, muffled voices drifting through vents. For the first time since I'd lived there, I felt like I was waiting to be asked to leave. The next morning, I made a decision that scared me. I started paying attention. Not the frantic kind of attention, not snooping or accusing, just observing. Watching how Lena moved through the house, how she spoke to Daniel, how she referred to spaces as ours instead of your mom's. Watching how Daniel shrank into himself whenever tension appeared, how quickly he deferred. Lena has started referring to the house as home, not in a shared way, but a claimed one. Our living room needs more light. Our kitchen works better this way. Our house has such good bones. I noticed how she'd begun answering the door without looking to see who it was, how she opened my mail by accident more than once, apologizing with the same soft smile. One afternoon, I came home to find a clipboard on the dining table. Notes, measurements, a floor plan sketch. "What's this?" I asked. Lena didn't look up from her phone. "I'm meeting with a contractor, just small changes." "Changes?" I echoed. She shrugged. "If we're going to be here long term, it makes sense." Long term. The words settled into my bones. That evening, I went through the house the way you do when you think you're losing something. I ran my fingers along the banister my husband had refinished himself. I stood in the doorway of Daniel's old room, remembering the way he used to pile his clothes on the chair instead of putting them away. I opened my filing cabinet in the spare room, the one Lena now referred to as the nursery. My documents were still there. Deed, mortgage papers, all in my name. That should have comforted me. It didn't, because something about Lena's confidence didn't match the facts. A few days later, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I'd come down the stairs quietly, slippers in hand, socks barely making a sound on the wood, when I heard Lena's voice from the kitchen. She was on the phone. "Yes, she lives there too," she said, "but it's complicated. We're establishing residency." Pause. "No, she doesn't need to know everything yet." My chest tightened. I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding loud enough that I was afraid she'd hear it through the phone. That night, I finally did something I'd been avoiding. I asked questions. Not of Daniel. He'd already shown me where he stood, somewhere between exhaustion and surrender. I went to the county records office on my lunch break, hands sweating as I waited in line. I told myself I was being dramatic, that this was just stress. But when the clerk pulled up the property file, my breath caught. There were new documents attached, not ownership transfers, not yet, but filings indicating intent, residency claims, utility responsibility shifts, mail forwarding requests. Someone had been laying groundwork. I drove home in silence, the weight of that knowledge pressing down on me. When I walked into the house, Lena was in the living room flipping through fabric samples like nothing in the world was wrong. "We need to talk," I said. She looked up, assessing. "Is something wrong?" I sat across from her. I went to the records office. For the first time, her smile flickered. "That paperwork," I continued, steady despite the storm inside me. "You're planning something." She folded her hands, calm again. "We're planning for the future." "You're planning to push me out," I said quietly. She laughed, a small breathy sound. "You're being dramatic." I stood up then, my legs trembling. "This is my house. I helped you when you needed it. I opened my doors." "And we're grateful," she said, her tone shifting just slightly, firmer now. "But things change." That was when she said it. "I have rights here too." The words hung between us, thick and heavy. "What rights?" I asked. She tilted her head. "We'll see." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table like strangers negotiating a deal. The sunlight that used to feel warm now felt harsh, highlighting every scratch on the wood, every chip in the old ceramic bowl between us. Lena folded her hands neatly, her posture straight, composed. I noticed she'd placed a small recorder beside her phone, not turned on, just visible enough to be intentional. My stomach tightened. "I don't want this to be difficult," she began. I almost laughed. Instead, I waited. "You've been generous," she continued, voice even, "but this situation isn't sustainable." "Sustainable for who?" I asked. "For the family we're building." I took a slow breath. "This is my house. I let you stay here temporarily." She nodded, like she'd expected that answer. "And we've established residency. We contribute. We receive mail here. We've made improvements." "Improvements?" My voice shook despite my effort. "You moved my husband's photo into a drawer." Her jaw tightened for a second. "We're creating a healthy environment." That was when I realized something important. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She was certain. "I've spoken to a lawyer," she said. The room went very still. "And he believes we have a strong case for occupancy rights." "Occupancy rights?" I stared at her, trying to reconcile this calm woman with the girl who'd once brought me grocery store flowers and thanked me for dinner. "You planned this," I whispered. She didn't deny it. "I planned for our future." I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You used me." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway where Daniel stood listening. "He agreed," she said softly. That broke something in me. I turned to my son. "Is that true?" He looked torn, exhausted. "We just didn't see another option." "You didn't see another option but to take my home?" I asked. Silence. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. My hands shook so badly I dropped my phone twice before I could dial. The woman on the other end spoke calmly, asked questions, told me what I already knew but needed to hear. Legally, the house was mine, but prolonged residency could complicate things if I didn't act. "Do not wait," she said firmly. That night, I packed a bag. Not because I was leaving for good, but because I needed space to think without Lena's presence pressing in on me. I stayed with a friend, slept on a couch that smelled like lavender and detergent, cried quietly into a pillow so I wouldn't wake anyone. The next morning, I returned with my lawyer's advice echoing in my ears. Lena met me at the door. "You should have told us you were leaving." "I don't need permission," I said. She smiled thinly. "We'll see about that." I walked past her and headed straight for my filing cabinet. Documents, deeds, proof. That was when I noticed the drawer was lighter. My chest tightened. "Where are my papers?" She leaned against the doorframe. "We moved some things for organization." "You took my deed," I said, my voice rising. "It's safer this way," she replied. I don't remember shouting, but I remember the sound of my own voice filling the house, raw and shaking. I remember Daniel stepping between us, hands raised. "Please," he said, "stop." "Give me my papers," I said. Lena crossed her arms. "You're upsetting the baby." That was the moment I saw how far she was willing to go. I called the police. My hands were steady when I dialed, even though my heart was racing. When the officers arrived, Lena's calm cracked for the first time. Her voice sharpened, her words rushed. It was all there in black and white: ownership, intent, removal of documents. The officers retrieved my papers from their bedroom drawer. Daniel didn't look at me. That night, Lena told me I was making things ugly. The next day, she filed a formal claim. The court date came faster than I expected. I sat in a hard wooden chair, clutching my purse like a lifeline. Lena sat across the room, one hand resting on her belly, Daniel beside her, eyes fixed on the floor. The judge listened, read, asked questions, and then, calmly, decisively, ruled. The house was mine. The filings were dismissed. Any continued attempt to claim residency without my consent would be unlawful. Lena's face went pale. Daniel finally looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw regret. But winning on paper didn't make my house feel like home again. The judge's ruling should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing in the middle of my living room after a storm, the walls still standing, but everything inside scattered and soaked. Lena didn't speak to me after court. Not a word. She walked past me like I was invisible, her hand tight around Daniel's arm, her jaw set in quiet fury. Daniel mumbled something, an apology maybe, but it dissolved into the air before it could land. We drove home separately. When I unlocked the front door, the house smelled wrong. Not dirty, just unfamiliar. A sharp citrus cleaner layered over something sweet, artificial. My living room looked staged, like a space designed to impress rather than live in. My throw pillows were gone, replaced with beige ones that matched nothing I owned. The old lamp by the sofa, the one my husband picked out because it gave gentle light, had been swapped for a tall, cold-looking one that buzzed faintly when turned on. I stood there longer than I meant to, key still in my hand. I realized then that legal ownership was only the beginning. If I wanted my life back, I was going to have to take it, calmly, deliberately, without cruelty. That evening, I asked Daniel to sit down with me, just the two of us. He looked tired, older than his years. The boy who once ran barefoot through this house was gone, replaced by a man pulled in two directions and failing both. "This can't continue," I said, my voice steady. "They need to move out." He swallowed. "She's pregnant." "And I'm your mother," I said softly, "and this is my home." He nodded slowly, tears pooling in his eyes. "I didn't mean for it to get like this." "I know," I said, and I meant it, even though it hurt. The next morning, I had my lawyer draft a formal notice. 30 days, clear language. No anger, no accusations, just facts. When Lena received it, she laughed. "You're heartless," she said, "kicking out your own grandchild." I didn't raise my voice. I'm protecting myself. That afternoon, I changed the locks. All of them. It felt strange, almost ceremonial, watching the locksmith work, metal clicking, mechanisms resetting. When he handed me the new keys, they felt heavier than they should have. That night, Daniel slept on the couch. Lena stayed in the bedroom with the door closed. The house felt divided, lines drawn where none had existed before. Over the next few weeks, Lena packed slowly, deliberately. She left messes, made comments loud enough for me to hear, told anyone who would listen that I was cruel, controlling, selfish. Family members started calling. Her mother accused me of betrayal. Her sister told me I'd regret this. I listened. I said nothing. One evening, Lena confronted me in the hallway. "You think you've won, but Daniel will remember this." I looked at her, truly looked, and saw fear beneath the anger. "This isn't about winning, it's about boundaries." She scoffed. "You'll end up alone." The words stung, not because I believed them, but because they echoed a fear I'd carried quietly since my husband died. Still, I didn't waver. On the last day, Daniel stood in the doorway with a suitcase in his hand. He hugged me awkwardly, like he wasn't sure where I still fit. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I love you," I said. "That hasn't changed." Lena didn't say goodbye. When the door closed behind them, the house went silent in a way it never had before. Not heavy, not tense, just quiet. I walked through each room slowly, picked up my husband's photo and placed it back where it belonged, opened windows, let fresh air in. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. Silence has a way of traveling. Within days of Daniel and Lena moving out, the story spread. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the soft, persistent way truths do when people start asking questions. A neighbor mentioned seeing the locksmith. A family friend asked why the nursery paint samples were gone. Church acquaintances offered careful smiles and long pauses where explanation should have been. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't defend myself either. I let the truth stand on its own. Lena, on the other hand, did not. She told her version everywhere she could, that I turned my back on family, that I'd forced a pregnant woman out, that I'd chosen property over love. For a while, I could feel the judgment in certain rooms, the slight hesitation before someone hugged me, the way conversations dipped when I walked past. It hurt, more than I expected. But then the questions changed. People began to notice things. The pattern of control Lena carried with her, the way Daniel rarely spoke without glancing at her. The stories didn't add up. A week later, Daniel came back alone. He stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. When I opened the door, he looked like he'd been holding his breath for days. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. We sat at the same kitchen table where Lena had once placed her recorder. Daniel stared at the wood grain like it might give him answers. "She's telling everyone you abandon us," he said quietly. "I know." He rubbed his face. "I didn't see it before." "See what?" I asked gently. How much control she needed, how small I'd become. That was the first real consequence, not court rulings or gossip, but awareness. Word reached extended family when Lena's mother tried to intervene, calling my sister and demanding she talk sense into me. My sister, bless her, asked questions, requested documents, listened. Soon others did too. At a family gathering I almost didn't attend, an aunt pulled me aside. "She tried to do something similar with her cousin," she whispered. "Didn't work then either." Patterns emerge when people compare notes. Daniel started therapy. I paid for the first few sessions, not because I felt responsible, but because I wanted to invest in his healing, not his guilt. Lena didn't like that. She called me one evening, her voice sharp. "You think you can buy him back?" "No," I said. "I think he deserves clarity." She hung up on me. The final public consequence came unexpectedly. Lena attempted to file another claim, this time citing emotional distress and displacement. The court dismissed it swiftly. The paperwork spoke for itself. The truth had weight now. People stopped asking me what happened. They started asking if I was okay.
Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, quiet ones, the kind you almost miss if you're not paying attention. The first piece was the morning I woke up and realized I hadn't checked my phone for messages from Daniel or braced myself for Lena's name to appear on the screen. The house was still. Not the tense stillness I'd grown used to, but a calm one, the kind that lets you breathe a little deeper without realizing you were holding your breath before. I made coffee and sat by the front window again, watching the sun stretch across the rug like it used to. The kettle didn't scream this time. I'd remembered it. I began putting my house back together, not all at once, but thoughtfully, slowly. I brought my husband's things out of drawers and boxes and placed them where they belonged, his watch on the dresser, his coat back in the hall closet, the framed photo returned to its nail on the wall. I didn't rush it. Each placement felt like an act of reclaiming not just space, but memory. Daniel came by once a week at first, alone. He never stayed long. We talked about small things, work, weather, the way the neighbor's tree was finally being trimmed. Sometimes we sat in silence, and that was okay too. Silence didn't feel dangerous anymore. One afternoon, he stood in the doorway of his old room, now empty again, and said quietly, "I forgot what it felt like to be here." I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. Therapy changed him. Not overnight, not dramatically, but he started speaking differently, more carefully, more honestly. He apologized without being prompted, without trying to soften the words or rush past them. "I should have protected you," he said once, eyes red. "And yourself," I replied. Lena didn't come back. They separated a few months later, quietly, no announcements, no public blame. I heard it through Daniel, his voice heavy but resolved. "She didn't want boundaries," he said. "She wanted control." I felt a familiar ache, not satisfaction, not victory, just sadness for what could have been and relief for what no longer was. As for me, I learned something important in those months. Being kind doesn't mean being unguarded. I had always believed love meant endurance, that if you just held on long enough, gave enough, bent enough, things would balance out. They don't. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's erosion. I started saying no more often, to extra responsibilities, to conversations that felt heavy before they even began. I stopped apologizing for needing space. I joined a walking group in the mornings, women my age who understood quiet strength without needing explanations. One of them said something that stayed with me. "You don't have to prove your goodness by suffering." I wish I'd heard that sooner. The house changed with me. It felt warmer again, lighter, not because pain was gone, but because it wasn't trapped inside the walls anymore. I repainted the nursery back into a guest room, soft green, the color it had always been. I planted new flowers in the yard, my hands in the soil, the smell of earth grounding me. Sometimes, late at night, I still thought about Lena, about what drove her. Fear, maybe, or a need to secure something she'd never felt safe having. I didn't hate her, but I didn't excuse her either. Healing doesn't require understanding someone else's wounds at the cost of your own. Daniel and I rebuilt, not the way things were, but something more honest, more adult.
We talked about mistakes, about choices, about how easy it is to confuse loyalty with silence. "He won't let it happen again," he said once. I believed him. And even if life tested that promise someday, I knew I would be okay because I had learned how to stand my ground without losing myself. People still ask me from time to time if I regret letting my son and his wife move in. They ask it carefully, usually after a pause, as if they're afraid the question might reopen something fragile inside me. I used to answer quickly. I used to say, "No, of course not," the way women are trained to, smoothing over the truth so no one feels uncomfortable. But now I take my time, because regret isn't a simple thing. I don't regret loving my child. I don't regret opening my home when I believed my family needed me. That part of me, the part that says yes when someone is struggling, that part is still good, still human, still worth keeping. What I regret is how long I stayed silent after love started to feel like erasure. There's a difference between helping and disappearing, between supporting and surrendering, between compromise and being slowly pushed out of your own life. I didn't see it at first because it didn't arrive all at once. It came in small pieces: a moved chair, a changed lock, a decision made without asking, each moment small enough to explain away, easy enough to forgive, until suddenly I was standing in my own kitchen wondering when I'd stopped belonging there. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles while it takes. And when it comes wrapped in family, it's even harder to name because we're taught that family means endurance, that love means patience without limits, that a good mother doesn't complain, doesn't confront, doesn't choose herself. I believed that for most of my life. I believed that if I stayed calm enough, kind enough, flexible enough, everything would work itself out, that peace was something you earned by shrinking. But here's what I learned the hard way. Peace that requires you to disappear isn't peace at all. It's fear wearing a polite face. After everything happened, after the house went quiet again, I had to sit with myself in ways I never had before. There were evenings when the silence felt too big, when I wondered if I'd pushed too hard, if I'd lost my son forever, if standing my ground had cost me more than it gave me. Those thoughts come easily when you've spent your life putting others first. But then I'd walk through my home, my real home, and feel my feet on the floor I paid for, see the light fall across the walls I'd painted with my husband decades ago, and I'd remember something important. I hadn't taken anything from anyone. I had simply stopped letting myself be taken from. There's a grief that comes with that realization, not just grief for what happened, but grief for all the times before, all the moments I stayed quiet to keep things smooth, all the instincts I ignored because I didn't want to be seen as difficult, dramatic, or selfish. Women are taught to fear those labels, but I've learned that difficult often just means unwilling to be used, and selfish often just means finally choosing yourself. My relationship with my son is still healing. Some days are warm and easy. Other days feel cautious, like we're both learning how to walk on new ground. I don't pretend it's perfect. Healing rarely is. But it's honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, builds something real. I no longer measure love by how much I can endure. I measure it by how safe I feel to speak, how respected I feel when I say no, how much room there is for my voice. If you're listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, if you recognize yourself in the quiet compromises, the swallowed words, the way your home or your life has started to feel unfamiliar, I want you to know something. You're not imagining it. That discomfort is information, that unease is wisdom, that voice you keep pushing down is trying to protect you. It doesn't mean you don't love your family. It doesn't mean you failed as a parent. It means you're waking up. And waking up can be painful, especially when it asks you to redraw boundaries with people who benefited from you having none. You may lose approval, you may be misunderstood, you may be painted as the villain in someone else's story. But listen to me carefully when I say this. Being misunderstood is not the same as being wrong. You can be kind and still say no. You can love deeply and still protect yourself. You can choose peace without choosing silence. Today, when I sit in my living room with the late afternoon sun warming the floor, I don't feel bitterness. I feel clarity. I feel grounded again, like myself again, not the version of me that existed only to serve, but the woman who built a life, survived loss, and finally learned to stand in her own truth. And if you're wondering whether it's too late for you, whether you've waited too long, given too much, stayed quiet for too many years, let me tell you this. As long as you can still hear your own voice, it's not too late. I'll leave you with a question, not to judge you, but to sit with gently. If the roles were reversed, would you expect this of someone you love? If the answer is no, then maybe it's time to give yourself the same grace you give everyone else.
Time didn't rush in to fill the space after everything ended. It moved carefully, like it was afraid to disturb what I was rebuilding. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons shifted in quiet ways, the kind you only notice when you slow down enough to pay attention. Leaves browned and fell in the yard. Rain came softer. The mornings grew cooler. And with each small change, I felt myself settling back into my own skin. There were days when I expected the phone to ring with bad news, days when I braced myself for another legal letter, another accusation, another demand disguised as guilt. Trauma has a way of training your body to anticipate impact long after the danger is past. But slowly, the tension loosened. Daniel kept coming by, not out of obligation, out of choice. One afternoon, he showed up with a toolbox and no explanation. He fixed the loose hinge on the back door, replaced a light switch that had been flickering for years. He worked quietly, the way he used to when he was younger, when words came harder than action. When he finished, he sat across from me at the table and said something that surprised us both. "I don't think I knew who I was before all this." I nodded. Sometimes we don't until someone else tries to decide for us. He looked at the walls, the photos, the furniture, familiar things he was finally seeing again. She made me feel like everything was urgent, like if I didn't choose her version of things immediately, I was failing. "That's how control works," I said gently. "It creates panic so you don't have time to think." He swallowed. "I'm sorry I let that panic override my loyalty to you." I didn't rush to comfort him. I didn't wave it away. I let the words land. "I forgive you," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't erase memory. It just allows us to move forward without poison." He nodded, eyes shining. That conversation didn't fix everything, but it anchored us. From then on, our relationship grew slowly, deliberately, with space for honesty and discomfort. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. We learned from it. And I learned something too. I learned that motherhood evolves. At some point, loving your child stops meaning sacrifice at all costs and starts meaning truth, even when that truth is painful, especially then. The house continued to heal alongside me. I hosted my first small gathering months later, nothing fancy, soup simmering on the stove, bread warming in the oven, friends filling the chairs that had once felt like obstacles instead of invitations. Someone commented on how peaceful the house felt. "I remembers itself again," I said without thinking. They smiled, not fully understanding, and that was okay. Not everyone needs the full story. I also learned to forgive myself for being slow to react, for doubting my instincts, for believing love required self-erasure.
Self-forgiveness is quieter than other kinds. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small mercies, sleeping better, laughing more easily, no longer flinching at the sound of footsteps in the hall. There were still moments of sadness. That future grandchild I imagined rocking in my arms didn't arrive the way I'd once dreamed. Grief doesn't vanish just because justice shows up. But grief can coexist with peace. And peace, I learned, is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of self-respect. One evening, I found the blue robe Lena used to wear folded in the back of the closet. For a long moment, I considered throwing it away. Instead, I washed it, donated it, and let it leave my life cleanly, without anger, without attachment. Letting go doesn't always need drama. Sometimes it just needs intention. I began mentoring a younger woman at work, recently divorced, unsure of her footing. She reminded me of myself years ago, apologizing for things that weren't her fault, minimizing her needs so others wouldn't feel threatened. One day she asked me how I learned to stand up for myself. I smiled. By getting tired of disappearing. She laughed softly. I think I'm close to that stage. You'll know when you're ready, I told her. It usually starts with a quiet enough. As for Lena, I heard very little after the separation. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she'd moved again. Another said she was starting over. I wished her no harm, but I didn't wish her access either. Distance can be a form of wisdom. Some people only understand boundaries when they're enforced. The anniversary of my husband's passing, Daniel came over with flowers, the kind my husband used to buy without checking the price. We stood together in the living room, the sun low and warm, and remembered him without heaviness. This house still feels like him, Daniel said. That's because he helped build it, and because I didn't let anyone rewrite that. We sat in silence after that, a good silence, a shared one. If there's anything this journey taught me, it's that life doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for courage, quiet courage, steady courage, the kind that shows up when you finally say, "This is where I stand." I didn't come out of this stronger because I fought harder than anyone else. I came out of this stronger because I stopped fighting myself. And if you're listening, still unsure whether choosing yourself is worth the cost, let me say this gently, clearly, from the other side. Nothing you lose by honoring yourself was ever truly meant to be kept. There comes a moment, after everything has settled, when you realize the story isn't about what was taken from you anymore. It's about what stayed. For me, that moment arrived on an ordinary afternoon. No phone call, no confrontation, no dramatic revelation. I was standing in my backyard, hose in hand, watering the plants I'd nearly let die during those months of tension and uncertainty. The sun was warm on my shoulders, and the smell of wet soil rose into the air, grounding, familiar, alive. I remember thinking, I'm still here. Not just in the house, in myself. For a long time, I had defined that chapter of my life by betrayal, by the shock of hearing my daughter-in-law say I wasn't welcome, by the humiliation of being locked out of my own home, by the quiet devastation of realizing my son had stood by while it happened. But standing there, watching water soak into the earth, I understood something new. Those moments were real, painful, unforgivable in some ways, but they were not the whole story. The whole story was that I faced something deeply unfair, and I didn't disappear. I didn't scream, I didn't destroy, I didn't turn bitter or cruel. I chose clarity over chaos, boundaries over resentment, self-respect over fear. And that choice changed everything. Daniel and I reached a new rhythm over time, not the old one, not the easy closeness of childhood or the unquestioned authority of motherhood, but something quieter, more mutual. He no longer came to me as a boy needing protection. He came as a man learning accountability. One evening, months after everything ended, he said something I never expected to hear. "I'm glad you didn't back down." I looked at him, surprised. "If you had," he continued, "I think I would have lost myself completely." That confession stayed with me. Parents are often told that standing firm will push their children away, that love means flexibility at any cost. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to model self-erasure. By protecting my home, I had shown my son something he needed to learn, that love without limits becomes harm, that loyalty doesn't mean silence, that strength can be calm and still unmovable. The house, my house, felt like a witness to all of it. The walls had absorbed raised voices and quiet tears. The floors remembered footsteps pacing late at night. The doors knew what it felt like to be locked, unlocked, reclaimed. But over time, the house softened again. Laughter returned. Not loud, not constant, but real. Music played while I cooked. Friends stayed longer. I hosted holidays again, refusing to shrink the table or apologize for the space I took up. And I noticed something else. I stopped bracing. I stopped listening for keys in the door that might signal conflict, stopped rehearsing explanations in my head, stopped wondering whether I was allowed to relax in my own living room. Safety, I learned, isn't just physical, it's emotional. And I had finally rebuilt both. I thought about Lena less and less, not because I'd forgiven her completely. Forgiveness is a process, not a switch, but because she no longer occupied space in my daily thoughts. Her power faded when my fear did. I understood, eventually, that her actions came from insecurity and control, not strength. But understanding someone's wounds doesn't mean offering them your body to bleed on. That was another lesson I carried forward. Compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. One night, long after the dust had settled, I sat alone in the living room with the lights low, the same room where she once told me I wasn't welcome, the same space where I had questioned my worth, my judgment, my place in my own family. I closed my eyes and let myself feel it, not the anger, not the grief, but the relief. Relief that I had listened to myself before it was too late. Relief that I had chosen dignity over comfort. Relief that I had not taught my son that love means surrender. I whispered something out loud then, not for anyone else, just for me. "I'm proud of you." It felt strange, necessary, true. If this story has taught me anything, it's that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people you open your door to, the people you feed, the people you trust to care about you because they share your blood or your name. And when that happens, the pain cuts deeper, but so does the growth. You learn who you are when you stop begging to belong in places you already earned. You learn that kindness is a strength, but only when it's paired with self-respect. You learn that it's possible to love your children without sacrificing your soul. So, if you're listening to this story and you're standing at the edge of a similar decision, if you're wondering whether holding your ground makes you cold or selfish or unloving, let me leave you with this final truth. You are not cruel for protecting what you built. You are not heartless for saying enough. And you are not wrong for refusing to disappear so others can be comfortable. Love should never require you to erase yourself. And home, real home, should always be the one place you never have to ask permission to exist. This is where my story ends, not with bitterness, not with victory, but with peace. And peace, I've learned, is the quiet reward of choosing yourself at last.